The man who would be president, the former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, returns to his native Egypt, and Mohamed El Baradei says he wants to serve the country. Does he have any chance of succeeding Hosni Mubarak, who's been president for 3 decades? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Mike Hanna. Mohamed El Baradei was welcomed back in Egypt by thousands of chanting supporters. The former head of the international nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, viewed here by many as the man who could inject new life in the politics of a country where the vast majority do not bother to vote. And El Baradei says it's a challenge he could take on.
After working for the international community, I want to work for the Egyptian people, to do what I can in helping Egypt on the path of democracy and economic and social development. As an Egyptian, when I hear so many of the Egyptian people asking me, in fact insisting that I participate politically, I have to say yes. I was born an Egyptian, I've lived as an Egyptian, and I will die an Egyptian.
But El Baradei insists the constitution must be amended before he commits himself to taking part in next year's presidential elections. He says the process must be seen to be free and fair, and calls for supervision by the judiciary as well as international monitors. He's also demanded the removal of Article 76 in the Constitution. This controversial amendment, introduced in 2005, states that any presidential candidate must have been a leader in an officially sanctioned political party for at least a year. Critics see this clause as tailor-made by the ruling party to maintain control of the presidency. There is a way for Mohamed El Baradei to run as an independent, but in this case, the constitution as written demands that he is endorsed by at least 250 elected officials, including 65 MPs and 25 senators, among others. Hosni Mubarak's ruling National Democratic Party dominates Parliament and Senate. To discuss this further, all our guests join us from Cairo today. Hassan Nafa is a professor of political science at Cairo University. Majed Reda Boutros of Helwan University is also a professor of political science and a member of the ruling National Democratic Party. And Hossam Hamalawi is also with us. He's a journalist and blogger. Let's begin with Hassan Nafa. Is there any chance that the conditions laid down by El Baradei could be met?
No, I doubt very much, because the government will not be easily prepared to do such amendment in the constitution. That's why there should be a lot of pressure coming from the whole people to really force the government to do the constitutional change. But I think we are witnessing now a new wave of political mobilization that might succeed to pressure the government. But I don't base a lot of hope on the willingness of the government, but I have a lot of confidence in the wish of the people to do the change. So we have to expect a lot of movement in the coming months. I think the current mobilization will go on and will be strengthened when someone like Mohamed El Baradei step in. I think this will boost very much the mobilization we are witnessing.
Majed Reda Boutros, we've got a situation where a man has not even announced that he's going to be running for the presidency and yet is already setting conditions. How do you view this?
Well, for any politician, he has to start by stating how he should work within the political framework, not setting conditions. When I apply for a job, I might investigate the conditions of the job. But when I'm running for presidency, I have to work within the framework of the political setting in Egypt, especially the constitution. I should not state conditions, because this constitution is not set by the government. It is approved by the majority of people. This is the highest law in land. So it is not amended by a wish of a citizen. It's amended by the wish of the majority of people. So I would rather that he should work within the existing and manipulate the existing situation rather than criticizing it.
Hassam Hamalawi, this question of political reform as a precondition for viable presidential elections to take place, according to Mohamed El Baradei, do you think this is a valid position?
Well, whether I agree ElBaradei is the best candidate or not, but I do agree that no one can really run in such a system. I mean, Dr. Majid was just speaking about how the constitution is amended not by only one citizen, but by the majority of people. Actually, it works the other way around here in Egypt. The constitution is amended by one citizen, who is usually President Hosni Mubarak, or his advisors, advising him to do so. That's why when President Mubarak came up in February 2005, suggesting and proposing amendments, everybody was shocked, including members of the National Democratic Party themselves. And when it came to endorsing these amendments, maybe Dr. Magid will remember what happened on the 25th of May 2005, when the ruling National Democratic Party sent plainclothes thugs to sexually assault women activists and women reporters in broad daylight in front of the press syndicate who were protesting against these sham amendments. So if I was in Baradei's shoes, of course, I cannot taint myself and running within the current framework, which in the first place does not give me the right to do so.
Majid Reda Butros, to get your position on that, the claim that those amendments that have been introduced since 2005 are the work of a minority group to ensure that they retain power in a presidential process.
According to representative democracy, the government and the institutions, the political institutions in any country should propose any amendment in the constitution. Then it's the side of the people, it's the role of the people to decide whether they accept it or not. The idea is that the majority of people in Egypt have accepted those amendments. And this is how it works in any political system, regardless of any allegation of fraud or irregularities in elections. I would say if the results of elections says the majority of people do approve this amendment, then this amendment is active.
Well, there's a certain element of personal things in this whole process as well. Just to look back at the context, before rumours surfaced that ElBaradei might stand for president, he'd been spoken about as a national hero. As head of the IAEA in 2005, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. At the time, the largest state-run newspaper, Al-Ahram, called him an icon for the modern era. In January 2006, ElBaradei was awarded Egypt's highest accolade, the Nile Medal, by President Mubarak himself. But after ElBaradei called for political reform in Egypt, the editor of the same paper wrote that he was an ill-informed American stooge. He also argued that ElBaradei was not Egyptian enough to run for president. It's a line echoed in other state-controlled media that ElBaradei has spent too long outside of Egypt and is out of touch. There has been some public backlash against the anti-ElBaradei comments in the press. ElBaradei's Facebook fan page has a membership that's growing by the thousands. Hassan Nafa, let's come to you and put that question. There does appear to be an ambivalence in Egypt about national heroes when they choose to threaten to enter politics?
Yeah, but let me just say, when you have a constitution that doesn't allow someone like Mohamed El Baradei to run for presidency, it means that you do have a real problem and a real obstacle, and this obstacle has to be removed. As a matter of fact, I didn't understand what Mohamed El Baradei said as conditions, but everybody knows in Egypt that we do not have a democratic system, and we need to have a free and fair election, and there hasn't been at all free and fair election during the last decades. So if Mohamed El Baradei wants to run, he has to run a fair and proper election. This is not the case. But I do believe that the people have high regard to Dr. El Baradei. They believe that he is a man who could lead the change. There is a real potential for the change right now, and I have the hope that all the people who are willing to have a real democratic system in Egypt will come together, will at least free their differences, ideological differences, and see Mohamed El Baradei as someone that could really bring these parts together and to pressure for a real change. Even if the current constitution is not changed, I think if we do have a real fair election and have guarantees that it will be watched by the civil society in Egypt and also the international civil society, I think there might be a consideration. We might pressure even Dr. Mohamed El Baradei to run through other party, but this is not the case for the moment. Now we do have to go together to pressure the government to do the constitutional changes that are needed to really have a fair and proper election.
Qasim Hamalawi, do you think that there's any possibility that the government could be persuaded to carry about these constitutional reforms?
The government of Egypt or the regime of Hosni Mubarak is never persuaded. The regime always has to be pressured into accepting this or rejecting that. Under the current circumstances, just as our colleague Dr. Hassan Nafa was just saying, ElBaradei cannot run. I mean, legally, he cannot run, basically. I do not see him securing those so-called 250 votes, nominations from elected officials at any point. However, if his supporters manage to build a strong grassroots campaign that's not necessarily just out there in the cyberspace and whose criteria cannot be judged for success depending on the number of people who join the Facebook group, but on the number of people on the ground in the provinces and in the capital who are willing to mobilize around that issue. So the coming period would actually be a challenge and a litmus paper test for his supporters.
But to stay with you, we've got a situation where a man who's got no party political background comes back to Egypt, hinting that he might run for political office and is welcomed by sectors of the Egyptian public. What does this say about the state of Egyptian politics, that somebody can come out of the cold and create a political stir?
It shows the level of desperation that the Egyptian public and the Egyptian political forces has reached after almost 3 decades of Hosni Mubarak's rule. I mean, the Hosni Mubarak and his predecessors who belonged to the military junta that rose to power in Egypt in 1952 have managed to kill political dynamism here in Egypt, have managed to kill any sort of initiatives, have stagnated the water for a very long time. So anyone at this point who presents a message of hope, he will be a symbol or she will be a symbol, whether he or she can deliver or not, but it just shows the level of thirst towards change in Egypt.
Majid Reda Boutros, as a member of the ruling NDP, do you think that the party has a role to play in instituting some reforms, in creating what Egyptians would regard as a more democratic entity?
Well, I have a little introduction to start with. Any sound and strong political system should embrace all political streams, all legitimate political streams. This will strengthen it, not weaken it. So if I were the president of the National Democratic Party, which I'm not speaking on their behalf, I'm speaking on my behalf, I would say that I'm going to ask him to be a member in our party, to just benefit from his insight. Such a figurehead in the international society has a great ideas. I personally benefit from his ideas. However, when we're talking about presidency, now a president has to fulfill certain criteria. The prime one is to be so deeply involved in the political arena in Egypt, so involved in the party system in Egypt. So Dr. ElBaradei, who's an international figurehead, he has been away from Egypt for 30 years. He hardly is keeping track of what happens in Egypt, only reading reports. So,
but do you welcome the political debate that his moves have actually created a new sense of political concern, perhaps, and political dispute within Egypt? Is this something welcomed by you?
Well, political reform, it has started since 2004. It has been gradually stated. This is by the regime. It states that we have problems. We are aware of those problems. We are following a gradual approach for political reform. We have admitted this. We are on the verge of the second and third reforms, third stages. As regard to mobilization, yes, it has stirred the shallow water. We need mobilization in the political arena in Egypt. Opposition is so weak in Egypt. I believe, we as a National Democratic Party need more initiatives, more political initiatives. You know, when you have a strong opponent, it's much better than when you have weak opponents. The party system in Egypt here, it's one big guy with nobody in front of them.
Hassan Nafa, to move that onto you, the question raised there by Majid Reda Boutros, the question of a viable opposition. Now, we hear there from a ruling National Democratic Party member that there is a need for this opposition. But do you think the opposition should be coming from within or from without? Where would a stronger opposition come from within Egypt?
Well, I think the opposition was weakened because we don't have any democratic system at all. We don't have any multi-party system. The existence of new parties depend on the ruling party itself. So if you say in the constitution that you should be a member of the party for at least 1 year and you, at the same time, you constrain the establishment of new parties, and at the same time, you don't allow the existing parties to really do their job and to contact people. It is a state run by the security forces, and that's why someone coming from outside the regime is very much welcome, because he could mobilize, he could gather the small pieces of the opposition together, and that's why we are. This moment is very important, because Dr. ElBaradei is seen by many of the factions in the opposition that maybe this is the man. Around him, a lot of opposition trends will gather together, and they force the government to change. His reputation, his international status could help in that sense. That's why the government, I think, do fear the presence of Mohamed El Baradei, the way he stepped in. They don't welcome this at all. But there is a work to be done in the coming months to build a new opposition forces, not to depend on the traditional and the classical opposition.
Let's go to Majid Reda Boutros here on a particular point, and that is you've had an NDP party in power for a long period of time. Looking at the wider Egyptian society, an unemployment rate of some 40%, a startling figure from the United Nations that 30% of people over the age of 10 cannot read or write. This is in a way, a very, very strong reflection, perhaps, on where the ruling party has failed. Do you accept responsibility for the fact that the society has not developed as it should?
Well, about those figures you have already mentioned, I have to review them and make sure that they are correct. The sources of unemployment, I mean, like when you have a figure about unemployment, there are several types of unemployment. So if you are talking about a specific definition...
But you would agree that the unemployment figure is high.
About 10%.
You would agree that the employment figure is high. Yeah.
I do agree it is high, but it's no way it reaches above 10 to 12%. We accept responsibility. I mean, if you look at economics, you will see that there is no society that does not have the rate of unemployment, simply because people moving from one job to another. I mean, this is at least 4%.
Well, let's look as well at another
economics.
figure, not to tell you too round statistics, but 40% of the people living below the poverty line. I mean, this is very, very serious figures.
Well, in Egypt, it's a different situation. When you are talking about under the poverty line, which is $1 a day, Egypt here adopts a different shadow prices, which is subsidized. Literally, we subsidize every commodity used by Egyptians, from the petrol till the bread, throughout all the edible oils and all food stuff. So when you are talking about the prices, don't compare the real prices with shadow prices. It is hardly subsidized. We spend more than $100 billion in subsidies annually.
So these are these are fair refutation of fairly figures. But let's go to Hossam Hamalawi and ask the question, is a new political dispensation in Egypt going to be served by an outsider coming in? Let's go back to the point of this debate. Can Mohamed El Baradei change and improve a political system that many say has become stagnant?
I mean, we talk about ElBaradei as an outsider, whatever that means, but does that mean really that the Mubaraks and the ruling National Democratic Party figures here in Egypt are insiders? I mean, when was the last time President Hosni Mubarak saw the street? Haven't you seen his convoys? The streets are never jammed when President Hosni Mubarak moves through them. The streets of Egypt are never jammed when Gamal Mubarak or any of the Mubarak's family move through them, or the ministers. They have not seen poverty in front of their own eyes. The so-called electoral campaign that came out in 2005 when President Hosni Mubarak was trying basically to convince the West, in addition to the public, that, oh, we have now multi-candidate presidential elections, which everybody knew that he was going to win from the beginning. Did he really tour all the provinces and go down and meet the peasants? The only peasant he met turned out to be a police conscript, actually, posing as a peasant in the end.
So the debate will continue, and valuable debate and very important discussions are happening. My thanks to our guests in Cairo, Hassan Nafa, Majed Reda Boutros, and Hossam Hamalawi. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.